guys, welcome to another huge episode of Triggered. Great to be with all of you today. A woman tried to run over federal law enforcement officers in Minneapolis yesterday. She weaponized her vehicle against an ICE agent. And now, Democrats from Tim Walz to the Minneapolis mayor are calling it murder. They're calling it terrorism. But there's new video, and it tells a much different story. Meanwhile, we have more on the Somali fraud scandal. But Minnesota AG, Democrat bigwig Keith Ellison now says it's not a serious matter. Shocked to hear that, guys. So stay tuned for all of it. My father just announced he's going to ban large institutional investors from buying up single-family homes. We've got a brand new food pyramid from RFK Jr. that actually tells Americans to eat real food. And Secretary Rubio just pulled us out of 66 anti-American international organizations. So, pretty solid week, I'd say. Like I said, guys, so much to cover. Let's get into all of it. Guys, make sure you're liking, sharing, subscribing so you never miss one of these major episodes. If you do miss the show here on Rumble, go over to Apple Podcasts, go to Spotify, where you can listen anytime. If your friends get their podcast that way, let them know about it. Have them check it out there. We just got to get this in front of as many people as possible. For all of the top headlines that we cover here on the show, go over to my news app, MXM News, like minute by minute, MXM, where you can get the mainstream news without the mainstream bias. And of course, guys, don't forget about our brave sponsors for having the guts to support this program. And also, guys, don't forget about the Birch Gold Group, where you can diversify your savings and protect your future. The Trump administration is moving fast to right all of the left's wrongs. But with all the damage we've seen the Democrats do, it's always smart to be prepared. And that's why thousands of Americans are buying gold now from the Birch Gold Group. Here are the facts. In the past 12 months, the value of gold has increased by 30%. And Birch Gold makes it extremely easy to convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold. Or you can even buy some gold to store in your home safe. Just text my name, Don Jr., D-O-N-J-R, to the number 989898, and Birch Gold will send you a free info kit on gold. There's no obligation, only useful information. It's about learning more and educating yourself. With an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and tens of thousands of happy customers, take control of protecting your savings today. Again, text my name, Don Jr., D-O-N-J-R, to the number 989898. Check out all the latest predictions on Polymarket. So if you follow politics, you know everyone's got an opinion. But on Polymarket, you actually get real odds on what's likely to happen. Polymarket is a prediction market where people trade on real events, elections, debates, policy moves, and it doesn't stop at politics. There are markets on the economies, tech, sports, pop culture, and so much more. It's all live, it's transparent, and it gives you a real-time indicator of what people really think is going to happen. So go give it a look at polymarket.com, check it out, and let me know what you think. And now, let's get into all of the top headlines. Let's start with what happened in Minneapolis yesterday, because this story has everything. It has video evidence. It has Democrat politicians lying through their teeth. It has the fake news running with a narrative that completely contradicts what actually happened. I'm shocked to hear this, as I'm sure you are. And it has Secretary Kristi Noem and the entire administration standing behind our brave ICE officers. Here's what we know. Yesterday morning, ICE agents were conducting enforcement operations in Minneapolis. This is part of the largest immigration enforcement operation ever carried out. 2,000 federal agents deployed to the Twin Cities. During one of these operations, agents approached a vehicle that was blocking the road. The driver refused to comply with lawful orders, and when officers tried to get her out of the vehicle, she put it into gear and drove directly at an ICE agent. The agent, fearing for his life, fired his weapon. The woman died from her injuries. Now, this is tragic. No one wants to see anyone lose their life. But let's be very clear about what the evidence shows. There's video, multiple angles, and when you watch it, you can see exactly what happened. Think about what you just saw. The agents gave her multiple commands to exit her vehicle. She refused. And when she accelerated towards a federal law enforcement officer, that officer defended himself. That's what happened. But here's where it gets crazy. Within hours, before any investigation was complete, Democrat politicians were out there calling this murder, calling it an act of aggression by federal agents. Failed politicians like Tim Walz, the guy who had to literally just drop out of his re-election campaign because of the fraud scandal in his state, the guy who was almost vice president of the United States, well, he decided to make things worse, much worse. Here's what he had to say.
Well, I said this yesterday. We've never been at war with our federal government. I think in this case that the National Guard is their main mission. They have a dual mission. There's
rogue federal agent? That's what he called an officer who defended himself against a vehicle being used as a weapon, defending himself against vehicular manslaughter? Walz activated the State Emergency Operations Center. He's putting the National Guard on standby. He told my father and Secretary Noem that they've done enough. So he's going to weaponize the National Guard against federal law enforcement? How do you think this works out? You know what, Tim? We're exposing the billions in fraud that happened on your watch. We've had to clean up the failures of your leadership and your party's leadership. And apparently, that's too much for you. But Secretary Noem wasn't having any of it. She held a press conference and laid out exactly what happened. Check it out.
We discussed what happened here today. We have two very different viewpoints of it. I talked specifically about the fact that we have laws. They need to be enforced. He knows that I believe sanctuary policies have protected criminals and placed a priority of them over the citizens that live here. And he knows we'll continue to do our work, and I encouraged him to work with us. We've never had a cooperative arrangement with law enforcement here. Whenever we've done investigations, whenever we've done police work, when we've been doing what we can to bring people to justice for the crimes that they commit, we haven't had the cooperation of the state of Minnesota or the city police here under the mayor's direction. If you talk to any of these federal law enforcement officers, they'll say that when they call for backup in a situation, that it's hit and miss. They were grateful today that the police chief and local law enforcement showed up at the scene and helped secure it to make sure that nobody was harmed and that the FBI could do their work. But I would encourage them to work with us, that we could form a partnership that would make sure that individuals have the opportunity to have a safe Minneapolis.
Secretary Noem is exactly right. The woman refused to comply with lawful orders. She attempted to use her vehicle as a weapon against a federal officer, and the officer responded according to his training. This is what happens when you try to interfere with federal law enforcement. And you know what? The vice president weighed in last night. J.D. Vance posted on X that the agent was justified, and he had a message for radicals assaulting, doxing, and threatening our ICE officers. Congratulations. We're going to work even harder to enforce the law. Right? That's the right message. The left wants to intimidate law enforcement into backing down. It's not going to work. They want to rile up their base to create these kinds of things. They want to make people feel like they don't actually have to comply with the law because they've been coddled for so long and they've been allowed to get away with this in these Democrat hellholes. And of course, over at CNN, they didn't quite see it that way. But thankfully, Scott Jennings was there to set the record straight.
The governor of Minnesota and the mayor of Minneapolis have weighed in and effectively called this guy a murderer. They don't know that. I mean, there's obviously 2 points of view, and I assume there's going to be more facts that we're all going to learn in the days and weeks ahead. But it's pretty apparent this guy was standing in front of a vehicle and somebody accelerated it at him. How this shakes out in the legal system, I don't know. I do know this: the president's been a strong proponent of standing up for these ICE agents and other federal law enforcement who have been, in fact, under assault from protesters since he took office, and instructed them to simply enforce federal immigration law. And we have seen, in my opinion, a lot of irresponsible rhetoric over the year from Democratic officials like Tim Walz, who have called them Gestapo and murderers and everything else. And so there are consequences to that kind of language, and I think we're seeing that play out today.
And by the way, what was Jill Biden doing back in 2020 in Minneapolis when she went to allegedly oversee, Jill Biden, Dr. Jill, doctor of something, she went there to oversee these fraudulent programs as part of the American Rescue Plan. In case you forgot, guys, here's a flashback.
First Lady Jill Biden making a stop in Minnesota today to tout the country's investments in child care. She was joined by Governor Walz and Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra during a visit this afternoon to the University of Minnesota. Biden highlighted major investments in child care through the American Rescue Plan. Billions of dollars in funding have helped states like Minnesota keep health care and child care providers open and boost pay for child care workers during the pandemic. First Lady says there's still more work to be done, though.
The challenges families face didn't just start with COVID-19, and we need fundamental changes if we hope to build back better than before.
More than 130,000 child care providers across the country have received federal funding. Last year, the state of Minnesota received more than $500 million to help the child care industry. During her visit, Joe Biden also made a pitch for universal preschool.
Now, here's something interesting that came out right after this shooting happened. Libs of TikTok, big following on X and Instagram, posted what appears to be coordinated talking points to call the woman who tried to run over the officer a, quote, legal observer. Look at your screen here for a second, guys. Post after post from Democrat politicians saying almost verbatim, almost the exact same word for word thing, all using the same phrase, legal observer. This is not organic. This is not natural. This didn't just happen. This, like all of their messaging, is 100% coordinated. These aren't random protesters showing up organically, just like they weren't in the Antifa riots, okay? They're organized groups training people how to obstruct federal law enforcement, how to impede ICE operations, how to put themselves in harm's way and then claim victimhood when things go wrong. This is what the administration has been warning about. When you have politicians and activist groups encouraging people to interfere with federal officers doing their jobs, eventually someone is going to get hurt. And then those same politicians turn around and blame the officers. Rinse and repeat. We've seen it 1,000 times, folks. You know exactly what's going on. It's a racket. It's a scam. And the American people see right through it. Now, you might be asking yourself why 2,000 federal agents in Minneapolis, why are they there in the first place? Why is this such a big deal? Well, let me tell you why. Because what's been uncovered in Minnesota is one of the largest fraud schemes in American history. I imagine it's just the beginning, but it's one of the largest that's been uncovered. Federal prosecutors estimate that up to $9 billion, with a B, not million, $9 billion has been stolen from American taxpayers through fraud in social services programs, childcare, nursing programs, housing assistance, Medicaid, and the vast majority of this fraud is centered in one community. Yesterday, the House Oversight Committee held its first hearing on this scandal, and the testimony was damning. The whistleblowers, yeah, guys, there's whistleblowers. Remember when whistleblowers were beyond reproach when they were lying about Trump? Well, these are ordinary citizens. Many of these people were in the administration, a Democrat administration in these states. The whistleblowers tried to sound the alarm for years. And what did Tim Walz and Keith Ellison do? They ignored it. Or worse, they actively participated in suppressing it. And here's something that just came out. Homeland Security officials told Just the News that nearly $700 million in cash was flagged by TSA at the Minneapolis airport over the last 2 years. $700 million being carried out in luggage by couriers, usually headed to Dubai through Amsterdam. Think about that number. 70% of $1 billion cash leaving Minneapolis airport was 99% larger than the cash leaving John F. Kennedy in New York City? How is that possible? 99% larger than one of the biggest airports anywhere in the world? Bigger than JFK, Atlanta, Dallas, Fort Worth airports out of Minneapolis? This was basically functioning as a foreign ATM machine, siphoning American taxpayer dollars out of the country. And what was the Biden administration doing about it? You guessed it, folks. Absolutely nothing. TSA agents were flagging these cash movements, they were reporting them, and the Biden administration showed zero curiosity, zero interest in investigating. I wonder why that is. Now, the Trump administration is on the ground. The FBI is investigating. Homeland Security is investigating. IRS criminal investigations is involved. And 98 defendants have already been charged. 85 of them of Somali descent. Shocking, guys. Shocking. But do you know what Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison said when he was asked about this yesterday on CNN?
Not that fraud is not a problem. Of course it is a problem. And of course we have to prosecute it. And of course we have been prosecuting it. But
have you done enough, General, to do so? I mean, one of the claims is that there has been hundreds of millions of dollars, but now there are some estimates that there could be $9 billion or more. And Noam was just suggesting they took hundreds of people off the street who were involved in fraud. Are you confident your office has done enough?
Of course we've done enough, and we're doing more every single day. This is a political matter. This is not a serious thing. And I tell you,
this is not a serious matter. This is political. Oh, yeah, no. $9 billion in fraud in your home state, not a serious matter. $700 million in cash, 99% more than the actual major airports in this country. No, this is not a serious matter. This is political. Give me a break. Billions of dollars stolen from programs meant to feed hungry children, provide care to autistic kids, house disabled Americans. You know where your taxpayers perhaps should be going to? That money? Stolen. And Keith Ellison says it's not serious. He says his office has done enough. Really, Keith? You've done enough? I think you're right, but probably not the way you mean it. Because audio has resurfaced of you, Keith, meeting in 2021 with people who would later be convicted in this fraud scheme. Audio where they're asking you for help getting more funding. Audio where they're talking about campaign donations. And guys, maybe that's why you think this isn't serious, Keith. Maybe you're a little close to this whole thing. Maybe you've been a huge beneficiary of it. Maybe this is exactly how the Democrat apparatus always outraises Republicans across the board. Maybe this money is getting siphoned back to the DNC, Act Blue, or the usual suspects, just like we saw with USAID. Again, guys, rinse and repeat. And at the congressional hearings yesterday, you had Democrat witnesses actually defending the fraud. Because of course they would, right? One witness was asked point blank by members of Congress whether large-scale immigration from Somalia had made Minnesota stronger or weaker. And instead of answering honestly, the witness dodged and deflected, because we all know that answer is not yes, okay? Give me a break. And when members of Congress asked about English proficiency, the Democrat witness called the question inappropriate, right? We can come here, they can do whatever they want, they don't have to assimilate, we have to pay them whatever they want, then they can steal it and send it home and keep the Democrat apparatus going. And of course, no one's going to investigate it in that state because they can't get elected if they're not supporting the apparatus that funds them and votes to keep the fraud going. I mean, it's a vicious cycle of epic proportions. Watch this clip from Nancy Mace.
My first question is this, Mr. Balyu, this afternoon. Should Somalians in Minnesota be required to speak English, their citizens? Yes or no? Should they be required to speak English if they're American citizens?
I think that question is really inappropriate.
Should they? It's not inappropriate. This is the United States of America. Do you speak English? Should Americans speak English? Citizens speak English? Yes or no?
Point of inquiry, is English the official language of the United States? It's a question I don't
Mr. Chairman, I'm being interrupted again by another
parliamentary inquiry.
I would like to reclaim my time, Mr.
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to reclaim my time.
She's
That
asking
seems
the
to be a
witness.
popular theme today.
That's not a valid inquiry.
It's a point of inquiry.
Women have a right to speak in this committee. Conservative women have the right to speak here and not be interrupted by my male colleagues.
Already got that
Mr.
Chairman,
I would like to reclaim my time. I lost like 10 seconds there.
Okay, we'll give you 10 seconds.
54% on food stamps, 73% on Medicaid, 81% on welfare in general. 81%. After 10 years in the country, 78% are still on welfare? So what are they bringing to the country? Why are we letting people who are just draining a system that's already stressed, that could be going to actually help Americans? Why are we doing nothing about it? How is it appropriate to ask whether people can speak English in America? How is it inappropriate to ask factual questions about taxpayer-funded programs? The left doesn't want to have this conversation because the facts do not support their narrative. Democrats in Minnesota allowed billions to be stolen on their watch. They ignored whistleblowers. They suppressed investigations. And now that the Trump administration is actually enforcing the law and holding people accountable, they're screaming racism and calling ICE agents murderers. All right. So while all this chaos is happening in Minneapolis, let me tell you what else happened yesterday, because there's a lot. Because while Democrats were melting down about law enforcement doing their jobs, the Trump administration was out there delivering real wins for the American people. Energy Secretary Chris Wright was at a conference in Miami, and he announced something huge. Remember how my father captured the dictator Maduro and liberated Venezuela? It feels like a long time ago, even if it was just this weekend. Well, now we're getting their oil. Check this out.
So we put that blockade on Venezuela. They're still producing oil. They can't ship it to the world. So it's in floating storage in tankers, mostly illegal, sanctioned gray market tankers, and it's on onshore storage in Venezuela. So we are in dialogue with the Venezuelan government, saying let's work together to fix Venezuela. We got rid of the head of the gang, Nicolas Maduro and his wife. They're in prison. Work with us. Let's improve your country together. So we're going to now allow those tankers to flow, but we're going to market that crude. They fully understand this. They're a partner in doing that. We're going to allow that crude to be sold so that revenue can be generated, but then we're going to control the flow of that revenue to make sure it's going for productive reasons in Venezuela.
Let me be more direct. Is there a narrative in Venezuela that you are stealing our oil?
I have not heard that narrative. I've seen celebrations in the street and Libre Venezuela out. I think people are thrilled. They've lived under, between Chavez and Maduro, 26 years in a brutal dictatorship that's only devastated that country and hurt the whole hemisphere. So I've not heard that narrative at all. And of course, if it's that narrative's out there, it's untrue. We're just controlling the flow of revenues from their oil.
Venezuela is going to turn over between 30 and 50 million barrels of sanctioned oil to the United States. And this is not a one-time thing. Okay, 50 million barrels at $50 a pop, that's pretty solid, guys. Secretary Wright said we're going to control Venezuelan oil sales indefinitely. That oil was going to China. Now it's coming to the United States. Okay? When people and Democrats were screaming, what does America want to do with Venezuela? Well, guys, what did China want to do with Venezuela? What did Russia want to do with Venezuela? What did Iran want to do with Venezuela? I would rather us control our hemisphere and that oil rather than giving it to our enemies who are going to weaponize it against us. And here's the key part. The revenue from those sales will be deposited into accounts controlled by the United States. We're going to use that leverage to drive real change in Venezuela, to rebuild their infrastructure, to help the Venezuelan people, and to make sure that country becomes an ally, as it always had been, instead of a narco-terrorist state-funding Hezbollah that is flooding our streets with drugs. Seems like a pretty solid change to me. Seems like a really beneficial change in direction. This, guys, is what peace through strength looks like. This is what happens when you have a president who actually knows how to negotiate. Biden couldn't do it. Obama couldn't do it. Bush couldn't do it. And even if they could, none of them were willing to even try. My father gets it done. And speaking of getting things done for the American people, let me tell you about something my father announced yesterday that's going to make a huge difference for working families. Okay, the stuff that's really important, that of course the media will never cover and will get lost in the maze of, fake news and or a barrage of the narrative that has nothing to do with it. They don't want you thinking about this stuff. Well, they're banning large institutional investors from buying single-family homes.
Want to get down to Washington. We have some breaking news out of the White House. Eamon Javers has that for us. What do we know here, Eamon?
Scott, we've got a new post here on social media from the President of the United States who says he is taking action to deal with inflation in home costs. The President taking to social media to say that I am immediately taking steps to ban large institutional investors from buying more single-family homes, and I will be calling on Congress to codify it. People live in homes, not corporations. I will discuss this topic, including further housing and affordability proposals and more at my speech in Davos in 2 weeks. So the president here is saying that the American dream of owning a home has gotten out of reach for too many Americans, particularly young Americans, and says he is going to take steps to block large institutional investors from buying homes.
People live in homes, not corporations. That's exactly right, guys. For years, large institutional investors have been buying up single-family homes all across the country. They turn them into rentals. They squeeze families out of the market. They drive up prices and rents and make it impossible. And young Americans who are trying to achieve the dream of home ownership are left out in the cold. Well, not anymore. My father announced he's immediately taking steps to ban large institutional investors from buying more single-family homes, and he's going to call on Congress to codify it into law. Wall Street may not be happy, but you know who is happy? Working families who want to own a home instead of renting from a corporation and being beholden to them forever. This is what happens when you have a president who actually puts American workers and American families first. The Democrats talk about housing affordability. They talk about helping young people, but they never actually do anything about it because their donors are the ones profiting from the current system. My father doesn't care about Wall Street donors. He cares about American families, and this policy proves it. And while we're talking about wins for American families, let's talk about what Secretary RFK Jr. and Secretary Brooke Rollins announced yesterday. The new dietary guidelines for Americans, okay? This is huge, guys. This is MAHA in effect. Make America healthy again. For decades, the federal government has been giving Americans terrible nutritional advice, probably because the biggest corporations in America were paying them to do so, telling people to load up on carbs and grains, pushing low-fat this and low-fat that. And what happened? Obesity rates have skyrocketed. Diabetes has skyrocketed. Heart disease, chronic illness, etc., all through the roof. We're sicker than ever. Well, Bobby Kennedy Jr. just changed all of that.
Today, about 50% of the calories that our children eat are ultra-processed food or highly refined carbohydrates, and it's literally poisoning them. And that is the result of a food pyramid that was driven by mercantile impulses that put Fruit Loops at the top of the food pyramid. We now have a science-based food pyramid that is based upon the most recent best science. And it's telling people to eat proteins, eat a lot of fruits and vegetables and whole grains. And that is going to transform the American dietary culture.
Eat real food. Wow, what a concept. It's almost revolutionary. The new guidelines bring back the food pyramid. But as many of us who've been paying attention to this for a long time have known, the new food pyramid is inverted. The old one never made any sense and made us fat and sick and unhealthy. At the top now, where the biggest portion is, you've got protein, dairy, healthy fats, vegetables, and fruits. At the bottom, in the smallest portion, where you should be eating the least of, you've got whole grains and highly processed foods, seed oils, ultra-processed garbage, added sugars. They're telling Americans to cut that stuff out. This is Make America Healthy Again. This is the movement in action. For the first time, federal dietary guidelines are actually recommending that Americans avoid highly processed foods. It's shocking that it took this long. Again, many of us have known about it for a long time. But for the first time, they're saying full-fat dairy is fine, because the non-fat dairy is just jacked up with sugar to make up for the lack of taste. That made you fat. They're emphasizing real whole foods over processed foods and processed food-like substances, right? That big corporations have been pushing on us for decades. The food industry isn't happy. Some of the so-called experts who've been giving Americans bad advice for pay for decades are also not happy. But you know who's happy? Parents who want their kids to grow up healthy. Families who are tired of being lied to about nutrition. This is what happens when you have someone like Bobby Kennedy who isn't beholden to big food and big pharma. He's actually trying to make Americans healthier. And these new guidelines are a huge step in the right direction. Now, let me tell you about something else that happened yesterday that the fake news is definitely not going to cover properly. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that the United States is withdrawing from 66 international organizations. 66 organizations, guys. 35 non-UN organizations and 31 UN entities. All of these deemed to be either redundant, mismanaged, wasteful, captured by interest working against us, or literally threats to our sovereignty. For years, American taxpayers have been subsidizing globalist bureaucrats who actively work against our interests. Organizations that push climate alarmism while China pollutes without consequences. Organizations that lecture America while taking our money. Organizations that undermine our sovereignty and our freedoms, right? This is like USAID, right? I don't know. You know what could fix Venezuela? Like a few $1 billion. Send $100 billion so we can make their kids trans and, I don't know, hope that something works out well for America. Not anymore, folks. Secretary Rubio said it perfectly. The days of billions of dollars in taxpayer money flowing to foreign interests at the expense of our people are over. This is America First in action, guys. We're not going to pay for organizations that don't serve American interests. We're not going to fund bureaucrats who hate us. If these organizations want to continue their work, they can do it without American taxpayer dollars. And by the way, the review is ongoing. There may be more withdrawals coming because my father is going through every single one of these institutional entanglements and asking one simple question. Does this serve the American people? If the answer is no, we are out. All right, guys. Before we wrap up, I want to take a moment to talk about what happened exactly 1 year ago yesterday. Okay? The 1 year anniversary of the devastating wildfires in Los Angeles. The Palisade fires. The Eaton fire. 31 people lost their lives. Over 16,000 structures destroyed. Entire neighborhoods wiped off the map. It was one of the worst natural disasters in California history. And you know what? A year later, those communities are still struggling to rebuild. Insurance companies are fighting people. Permitting is a nightmare. The infrastructure still isn't there. Families who lost everything are scattered across the country. Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Colorado, because they could not wait for California to get its act together. Check this out.
With more pipes bursting at destroyed homes, the pressure in the system dropped catastrophically. This is my house. It's the only house on the corner that survived. We can't live in it right now because even though it's one of the few homes still standing in the neighborhood, it has been damaged by the fire and also has high levels of contaminants. So my family and I had to leave and could not return. I feel like I'm doing the very best I can to report on what's happening in Pacific Palisades, to give voice to the concerns of the community, but also to help my family return home.
Mr. President, my name is Joel Pollack, and I am a journalist, but I happen to live in the Pacific Palisades. But we should not have to rely on buckets to put out a fire.
That's right.
You can't stop an 80-mile-per-hour wind or 100-mile-per-hour wind, but there were many things that went wrong here that are basic and small.
California's state and local leaders have struggled to manage the recovery. LA's hand-picked recovery czar left after 3 months. Bureaucratic red tape has held up rebuilding permits. The city council can't figure out whether to waive permit fees, and residents say there hasn't been meaningful property tax relief.
When it comes to like City Hall and Sacramento, negligence is the word I can only come up with about January 7th.
I've been involved in Democratic politics for a long time, and so I've been so disappointed to see people not just rolling up their sleeves and getting to work.
I'm a Reagan conservative, and what was it he was famous for saying? The worst thing you can hear is we're the government and we're here to help. I've seen more of that in action.
I have so much rage in me against the administration and the government here, and not only local in LA, but statewide.
Think about that, guys. 1 year later, and maybe 25 to 30% of residents plan to rebuild. The rest have given up. They've folded. They've left. They've moved. The state failed them so badly, they decided to start over somewhere else. And what was Governor Newsom doing during those fires? He was playing politics. He was attacking my father for pointing out that California's water management policies contributed to the disaster. He was more focused on being a resistance hero than actually helping his own people. And if you don't believe me, go back and see the clip. And maybe we should play it here now of my father talking about this in his first term.
Newsom had an opportunity to have millions of gallons a week, a day, millions and millions of gallons come down from the north. And I was able to get him federal approval from that, from the Department of Commerce of all departments. I didn't realize it would go through Commerce. I would have thought environmental, but it goes through Commerce. I got all of the approvals, and he said, I don't want to sign it. I don't want the water. We don't need the water. I said, you need the water. Your reservoirs are empty, the whole place. You need the water. That was 5 years ago. And I had it all done. The work was all done. We sent it to him. He refused to sign it. And if you noticed yesterday, the hydrants were empty. They didn't have any water.
Way before the fires, okay? It's not like California doesn't have water. Most of this stuff was right on the coast. They're on the Pacific Ocean, a few feet away. Couldn't come up with a way to pump that. Couldn't do that because, that would make sense. That would require someone to do their job. That would require the agencies and the heads of those agencies to not be trans whatever people who have no experience doing any of those things. The infrastructure wasn't there. The reservoirs were drained for environmental reasons. The fire departments were understaffed. Their command was staffed with woke idiots who had no business being there. The response was chaotic. And now, a year later, the people who survived are still fighting to put their lives back together. This is what happens when you have Democrat leadership that cares more about ideology than about the people they're supposed to serve. This is what happens when you have politicians who would rather virtue signal about climate change than actually maintain the basic infrastructure that protects communities. My heart goes out to everyone who lost loved ones, who lost their homes, who lost their communities in those fires. They deserve better from their leaders. And hopefully, over the next few years, they'll get new leaders who actually put them first. Guys, the Trump administration is delivering results for the American people. I know you won't hear about it or read about it in conventional sources. They're enforcing the law, fighting corruption, putting America first. And the left is melting down about it. They're melting down about all of it. Guys, thanks for tuning in. make sure that you're liking, sharing, and subscribing, okay? Like, hit the button right now. It takes 2 seconds. It takes no time whatsoever. Share it with your friends. Send it to your people, okay? If you haven't done it already, subscribe. Make sure we are getting this stuff out there because it's either lost on purpose, totally neglected, or it's going to be shielded in the array of faux crap that they're screeching about each and every day, okay? Make sure you're also checking out our sponsors down below and in the video description, okay? It's not easy to support a show like this. It takes guts. Make sure you support those who share your values and are willing to be engaged in this fight because this is the fight for our civilization. Okay, those guys make this show possible and they deserve your support. Download MXM News for all of the headlines without the mainstream bias. Follow me on social media across the board. Stay engaged because what's happening right now in America is historic and we'll all have a role to play. The future that we leave to our children will be decided by us. Make sure we're fighting for it. Thanks, guys, and I'll talk to you all again on Thursday.